The Arizona sun had a way of stripping the world bare: sky, stone, bone, even a man's memories. It climbed slow that morning, a dull copper coin lifting over the dry river valley while the wind drifted long and low through the sage. Rafe White stood in the doorway of his barn, coffee steaming in one hand, the other resting on the worn handle of a curry comb. The horses shifted inside hooves, scraping the dirt. Rafe liked mornings before anyone started talking. Silence fit him well. It made the land feel honest. At 36, he was broad-shouldered, sun-browned, like the mesas around him. His eyes held a quiet most folks mistook for coldness. But it wasn't cold, just a man who'd learned what speaking too freely could cost. The scars on his wrists said more than he ever cared to. Thin white lines left by rope and rough hands. Years back, soldiers had branded him a traitor, a half-breed Apache who understood horses better than orders. They'd locked him in a stockade near Fort Bowie for a long burning summer. When he finally walked out, something of him stayed behind those fences. Now he raised horses instead of fighting wars, lean, desert-born creatures with Spanish blood and sharp instincts. He knew each one's temper the way other men knew kin. They were his quiet, his penance. That morning he had 3 fine mares to deliver south near Esperanza. The buyer was a man called Drex Ransom. Rafe had heard the name whispered in saloons, usually with a warning tucked behind it. But Ransom paid in gold and didn't argue over price. And Rafe's feed debt wasn't shrinking, so he saddled up before the heat thickened, checked his cinches twice, and headed out. The ride took most of the morning. The trail twisted through dry arroyos and patches of mesquite, where jackrabbits darted like flickering shadows. By the time Rafe reached the Ransom spread, the sun was high enough to burn the back of his neck. The place looked prosperous. Big house, slow-turning windmill, tidy corrals, but a strange stillness hung over it, enough to make his horses prick their ears. A heavy man stepped off the porch as Rafe rode in. His white shirt strained at the buttons, and his smile didn't bother reaching his eyes. "Morning to you," he called, wiping sweat from his neck with a red kerchief. "You must be White the breeder from Dry River." "That's me," Rafe said. He swung down, dust rising around his boots. 3 mares. Good stock. You'll want to see them move." Ransom's gaze slid over the animals, then back to Rafe. "Fine creatures. You Apache folks sure know horses." Rafe said nothing. Silence was safer than correcting men like him. "Barn's this way," Ransom went on. "Cooler inside. I'll fetch your coin after they're settled." The barn leaned against the slope, broad and shadowed. The first breath inside tasted of hay and dust. Then something sharper, metal, maybe rust. Rafe led the mares in and tied them off one by one. Light sliced through the boards in thin golden ribs. Somewhere deeper in the dark, a chain clinked. He paused, hand on the last mare's bridle. Horses hated strange noises, and his mare flicked her tail uneasy. There it was again, a faint sound, not gear shifting but a thin human breath catching. Rafe stepped toward the far stall. A heap of burlap shivered. Under it lay a woman, pale against the dirt, her ankle shackled to a post. Her dress was torn hair tangled with straw. She looked up through the dimness, eyes green and frightened, but clear. Not wild, not broken, just desperate. Rafe's pulse slowed the way it always did when danger showed its shape. He crouched, voice low. "You hurt." Her lips moved but no sound came. Only the soft rattle of the chain. His jaw tightened. The smell in here wasn't only rust, it was fear. Neglect. He rose just as Ransom's boots thudded at the doorway. "Everything all right in there?" the man called. Rafe stepped from the shadows, wiping his palms on his jeans. "Fine. Just checking the stalls." Ransom's eyes drifted past him, curious, not suspicious yet. "Good, good. We keep a few critters in here that spook easy. Don't mind the noise. Had a stray once, mean little thing tried to bite." He laughed, thick and wet, and tossed a coin pouch toward Rafe. "There's your pay. You're a man of few words. I like that. Let the horses cool, then head on your way. Rafe caught the pouch without looking. Much obliged. Drex turned back toward the house, still rambling, but Rafe wasn't listening anymore. He kept staring at the barn door, long after the man's footsteps faded away. Behind him came a faint sound, the clink of a chain, the soft drag of breath. A plea without words. He set the coin pouch on a bale of hay, his mind already made up. The desert sun blazed outside, but inside Rafe's chest, another kind of heat, stirred quiet, steady human. He walked back to the stall and knelt beside her again. "Don't make a sound," he murmured, drawing his knife. Moonlight glinted along the blade as he slipped it into the rusted links. The chain broke with a weary sigh of metal, and the woman stared at him like she couldn't believe the world still allowed a man willing to help. Rafe glanced toward the open doorway. "We leave when the moon's high," he whispered. "Stay quiet until then." Outside, wind scraped over the valley, carrying the scent of far-off thunder and the promise of rain. The day was young, but Rafe knew something had shifted before this barn after this barn. Same way a horse turns its head before taking a long, unfamiliar trail. Night settled slow and heavy over the Ransom, spread thick as heat-soaked canvas. Inside the barn, the air grew dense hay sweat and the bite of old rust. Rafe waited in the shadows, back braced against a stall door, eyes fixed on the thin line of moonlight seeping beneath the wall. His own horse ghost was tied outside the north fence far enough that any snort wouldn't draw attention. Every sound felt sharp. A nail settling in the boards, a distant coyote crying from the ridge. From the house came muffled laughter, men drinking careless and loud. He counted 3 voices, Drex, and 2 hands most likely. Good. Drunk men lay down hard. The girl, no. The woman sat where he'd left her knees. Pulled tight, fingers trembling as she tried to wrap burlap around her bare feet. She flinched when he approached. "Easy," he said, voice low. "You can walk." "I think so." Her voice rasped dry, cracked someone who hadn't spoken in days. He studied her face in the dimness. Young, early 20s, though the bruises made it hard to tell. One cheekbone swollen, a scab splitting near her mouth. But her eyes, green as rain-lit glass, were clear. Fear lived there, yes, but her mind was sound. Madness hadn't touched her. That had been Drex's lie. "Name?" he asked, quietly. She hesitated, as if speaking might betray her. "Mara," she whispered. "Mara Benson." "All right, Mara. We move when the moon gives us enough light. Stay close behind me." She nodded, lips trembling. When he reached for the last bit of chain, she recoiled again. He paused. "I'm not him," he said simply. Then the chain fell away, clattering softly onto the dirt. They listened a while to the fading laughter, the restless shifting of horses. When the house finally quieted, Rafe motioned for her to follow. They slipped out the back, keeping low along the fence. The desert night was cool sky, thick with stars. Mara's breathing came fast and shallow. He could almost feel her fear humming through the dark. At the corral's edge, Ghost lifted his head, ears twitching. Rafe whispered an Apache word, steadying familiar. Ghost stood like carved stone. He helped Mara up, then swung into the saddle behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady. She stiffened, but didn't pull away. They rode in silence. The land stretched endless and silver beneath the moon. A coyote cried somewhere to the west, a long, lonely sound. Rafe kept them moving for miles until Drex's lights faded behind them and the desert opened wide. Only then did he slow the horse. "You can rest," he said, nodding toward a cluster of mesquite. He dismounted and lifted her down. Her legs buckled. He caught her before she hit the sand. "Sorry," she gasped. "Haven't stood much." "Don't worry." He guided her to soft ground and pulled a canteen free. "Here." She drank greedily, coughing halfway through. When she tried to return it, her hands shook too badly to hold it. He crouched beside her, studying the faint blue bruises, trailing her arms like vines. "How long were you there?" he asked. "3 days. Maybe 4. I'm not sure. They moved me at night. Said they were taking me to Mexico." His jaw tightened. "You know what for?" Her eyes found his steady despite the tremble. "I know." A cold wind swept off the desert. Rafe rose and pulled a blanket from his saddlebag, settling it gently over her shoulders. "We'll rest until dawn," Rafe said quietly. "After that, I'll set you on the trail to Dantan, about 15 miles east. You follow the riverbed. Stay right when it splits. Understand?" She looked down at the blanket, clutching it tight. "And if they find me again?" "Keep walking," he answered. "There's a marshal in Dantan. Tell him Drex Ransom's name." Her lips parted like she meant to argue, but nothing came out. The desert lay around them in hushed stillness, wind brushing through the dry grass. Rafe sat a few feet away, feeding small twigs into a low fire he'd built behind a rock. The flames threw just enough light to show the delicate lines of her face as she watched them dance. "Why did you help me?" she asked at last. He didn't look up. "Didn't sit right leaving you there. That's all. That's enough." Mara studied him, trying to read the hard-set angles softened by firelight. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt too thin, so she stayed quiet. When the first pale gray brushed the horizon, Rafe smothered the fire and began packing his gear. The air carried a faint scent of creosote, a promise of distant rain. Mara stood wrapped in the blanket, hair tangled by the wind. "You're sure I'll find the town?" she asked. "You won't miss it." He pointed east. "Take the low ground. Follow the river. You'll see chimney smoke by noon." She nodded, swallowing. "And you horses need tending. Life doesn't halt." Mara hesitated. Her voice came small. "I don't have money. No one in Dantan knows me. And if Ransom's men are there," Rafe rubbed the back of his neck. "You're saying you want to come with me? I need somewhere to go, at least until I can stand on my own." He studied her, the way she gripped the blanket like it was the last solid thing in her world. Rafe didn't want company, didn't need someone seeing the ghosts that trailed him. But sending her off alone felt like another kind of cruelty. "My place isn't much," he said finally. "A few acres, a barn, a creek. You can stay till you sort out what's next." Relief flashed across her face so quickly it nearly hurt to witness. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You'll have to work." "I can work," she said. "I've done worse." They rode again as the sun climbed a weak, pale light, stretching across the desert. Mara sat straighter now, though each jolt of the horse made her flinch. Rafe kept the pace slow, guiding Ghost through dry washes and over low ridges until the land opened into the quiet valley he called home. At the wooden gate, the corral horses lifted their heads, greeting with soft snorts. Rafe dismounted and helped her down. "This is it," he said. "You can rest inside. Pumps by the shed. There's stew on the stove if the fire kept." She looked around the low house, the spread of land, the scent of hay drifting through the morning, and, for the first time since he'd found her, she breathed without trembling. Rafe loosened Ghost's saddle and led him toward the barn. He didn't look back until he heard the soft creak of the door behind him, closing gently against the morning light. Only then did he let out a breath. He'd meant only to save a stranger, but as the sun spilled gold over the ridge, Rafe felt something shift inside him, something he couldn't name and couldn't undo. The world had gotten complicated again, and the part of him he thought long gone had begun to stir. The first days after Mara arrived passed like wind sliding over dry grass, quiet, cautious, full of empty space neither of them knew how to fill. She slept for hours at a stretch, waking only when the smell of coffee or fresh cornbread drifted through the window. Rafe gave her time the way he gave a skittish horse space before reaching for the reins. The house was small sun-baked boards with a roof that whistled in a hard wind. Behind it stood the barn, and beyond that, the corrals where his herd grazed in thin morning light. Life moved in simple rhythms: water, the troughs mend the fences, patch whatever the sun had cracked. Mara learned quick that silence was part of work here. Rafe didn't waste words, but the ones he used always fit. By the third morning, she was up before him, trying to sweep the porch. The broom shook in her hands, leaving her pale and tired. Rafe stepped out of the barn, sleeves rolled, rope slung over his shoulder. "You don't have to push yourself," he said. She set the broom aside. "I need to do something." He nodded. He understood more than he said. If you want to help feed the chickens, they don't care how steady your hands are. She gave him a faint smile, the first real bit of light he'd seen on her face. In the evenings, they sat on the porch as the desert cooled. The land softened in that hour, the red soil easing into lavender, the scent of creosote turning sweet after the rare gift of rain. Sometimes Rafe talked about horse bloodlines, their gait, the way each one carried a sliver of desert spirit in its bones. Sometimes Mara shared small scraps of her past, always in short, quiet drops, like stones slipping into deep water. She had traveled from Kansas, answering an advertisement for a tutor on a ranch near Tucson. The man who met her at the station had seemed polite right up until the road emptied behind them. After that came only Hans' fear and a barn door slamming shut. She didn't go on. Rafe didn't push. He knew what it meant to be locked away. He could still smell iron and dust from his own cell if he let his thoughts drift too far. Watching her try to press her pain into something small stirred an old ache he'd buried long ago. One night she asked, "Were you really a prisoner once?" He nodded. "Army said I was helping the wrong people. Were you?" "I was helping my own," he said simply. "Didn't matter to them." She studied him in the half-light, the worn lines at his eyes, the quiet weight in his voice. "You don't talk like an Apache. I talk like a man who's been told not to." She looked away embarrassed, but he only sipped his coffee. "You're still free to ask," he added. "I just don't always have the right answers." By the end of the first week, her bruises had faded to yellow. She could lift a water bucket again, walk to the river with him to fill the barrels. The riverbed was mostly dry, a thin ribbon of water twisting through the stones. When she bent to wash her face, her reflection quivered, split by the current. She watched as it pieced itself back together, startled by how unfamiliar she looked. "Water shows what's real," Rafe said behind her. "Sometimes that's harder to face than chains." She smiled faintly. "You sound like an old preacher." He chuckled. A preacher wouldn't keep a rifle by the bed. That night Mara dreamed of the barn and woke with her heart racing. Rafe sat by the stove oiling his Winchester. He didn't ask what she'd seen. He simply poured a cup of water and said, "Bad things lose their grip when you speak them aloud." It helped her breathe again. The next morning a rider crossed the ridge, a speck of dust against the bright sky. Rafe's eyes followed until it vanished behind the hills. He didn't speak of it, but that night he saddled one of the mares and rode out alone, not returning until dawn. When Mara saw him again, something in his face had hardened. "Trouble?" she asked. "Maybe." Drex's men were asking questions in Dantan. Her hands went cold. "You think they'll find us?" "Not yet. But they're looking." He glanced toward the corral. "We move if we must. I've done it before. I don't want you running because of me. You didn't give me a choice." She looked at him, then really looked. The steady strength, the tired eyes, the man who'd saved her without asking for a reason. "Then I'll help however I can." He gave a small nod. "I'll start by learning to shoot." "I can't." "You can." He handed her the small Colt from his belt, heavy and unfamiliar in her hands. "Out here, everyone learns to fight, even those who wish they didn't." Her first shot nearly knocked her backward. He steadied her elbow. "Don't fight the recoil," he said. "Breathe with it." By the fifth shot, she hit the mark, astonished. Rafe allowed himself a brief smile before looking away, almost ashamed of feeling anything at all. The days settled into rhythm again, work, rest, and small lessons in quiet courage. Mara mended the shirts he never bothered fixing, baked bread that never quite rose, and laughed. Truly laughed for the first time in months when one of the colts tried to chew her braid. Ray found himself listening for that sound even when pretending not to. Still a line remained between them, one neither dared cross. She felt it when he stepped back each time their hands brushed. He felt it when her voice softened around his name, as if she didn't know whether she deserved to it. One evening, as the sun bled behind the hills, she asked, "When this is over, when they stop searching, what will you do?" He thought a moment. Keep the horses fed, watch the sky change, maybe sleep a whole night without dreaming. And if you wanted more than that. He looked at her. I stopped believing I could. She looked away, a strange ache blooming in her chest. Maybe it's time to start again. They sat quiet for a long stretch, the light fading to blue, the desert air cooling around them. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured, hinting the dry season would end, but not yet. Rafe rose first. "Storm's coming. We should check the roof." Mara followed him inside the faintest hint of rain on the wind. As he tightened shutters, she watched him move, a man who fixed what he could and endured what he couldn't. She realized then that whatever storm waited inside or out, she didn't want to face it anywhere but here. Rain came in the night, a thin whispering fall. By morning the air was sharp and cool, and the sky washed silver, making the world feel new. Rafe walked the fence line, his coat darkened by the damp morning air. Inside, Mara had started a fire in the stove. She moved with steadier hands now. The bruises that once marked her skin had faded to faint yellow shadows. The woman who had once flinched at every noise now moved through the house as though she belonged there, though neither dared say it aloud. The whole valley sat in a hushed calm, wrapped in the scent of wet earth. Steam rose off the horses as they shifted in the corral, shaking rain from their coats. Rafe paused beside Ghost, his finest stallion, rubbing him down while murmuring a few soft words in Apache. The language sounded like wind rolling over rock, quiet, patient, older than anything else in the valley. Mara stepped outside with a tin cup of coffee. "You talk to them like they understand," she said. "They do," he answered. "Just not the way people do." She watched him, his easy strength, the gentleness in his hands. "When you talk like that, it sounds like a prayer." He gave a small smile. "Maybe it is." They worked side by side most days, now fixing fence, feeding stock, hauling water from the creek. Mara insisted on helping. Rafe tried sparing her the hardest chores, but she needed to feel useful, and he'd learned not to argue with a woman who'd already survived worse than sore muscles or splinters. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with hunger, but with something quieter, almost reverent. It made her chest tighten in ways that frightened her more than any memory of Drex's men. In town, talk had begun to stir. Clay Dillard, who ran the feed store, had seen Rafe ride in with a woman sitting behind him. By nightfall, half of Danton was whispering that the half-breed horseman was hiding a white woman out at his place. 2 nights later, a rider brought word. Tate Dillard, Clay's nephew, who sometimes traded salt blocks for one of Rafe's young colts, rode up to the gate jittery as a colt himself. "Rafe," he called, "folks are talking. They think that girl's out here against her will." Rafe's face didn't move, but his eyes turned cold. "You believe that?" Tate shook his head fast. "No, sir. But others might. Best be careful who sees her." Rafe thanked him and tossed a sack of oats into his hands. When the boy rode off, dust trailing behind him, Rafe stood a long time at the gate thinking. That night he told Mara. She listened, pale fingers twisting in her lap. "If they come, if they think you took me," he cut her off. "They won't get near you. But it could ruin you. Reputation's a thing men who never bleed care about." She reached across the small table, her fingertips touching his wrist. "You shouldn't have to pay for saving me." He looked at her hand on his skin, the first unguarded touch between them, and something inside him shifted again. "Maybe I didn't save you," he said softly. Maybe you kept me from becoming a man who stopped trying. The words hung between them raw and honest. She withdrew her hand, not because she wanted to, but because she was afraid of what might happen if she didn't. To keep suspicion down, Rafe told her to stay inside whenever riders passed. Mara hated it, the drawn curtains, the still air, but she understood. Once when they needed flour and kerosene, she cut her hair short and rode with him, wearing one of his old shirts and a woven shawl pulled low. He introduced her as Maria, a cousin from Sonora. The storekeeper's wife watched her too long but said nothing. They loaded supplies and left town before gossip could catch up. Back at the ranch, Mara stepped out of the house for the first time in weeks, holding the small straw hat Rafe had bought from a traveling peddler. You think they believed I was your cousin? He shrugged. Didn't matter. We just needed to get home. Home, she repeated softly, testing the word. It felt strange but right. That night, thunder rolled across the ridges. Rafe hung a lantern on the porch and watched the storm build. Mara joined him with a blanket around her shoulders. Why do you stay out here? She asked. You could sell this place. Move somewhere folks don't stare. He drew a slow breath. Because this land doesn't ask what I am. It just lets me be. She looked out toward the dark valley, lightning flickering on the horizon. Then maybe it'll let me be too. He turned to her eyes, reflecting the brief flash of light. It already does. For a long moment, neither moved. Thunder filled the silence, deep and steady as a heartbeat. The next morning brought strangers. Rafe spotted them long before they reached the gate. 3 armed men, their horses lathered from hard riding. His stomach tightened. Maybe Drex's men, maybe bounty hunters, chasing a rumor. He stepped into the house. Get your things, he told Mara. We might have to ride. Her face drained of color, but she nodded. Is it them? Could be, Rafe said. Stay in the back until I call. He stepped outside to meet the riders. The lead man was tall and narrow-shouldered, a scar dragging from ear to jaw. Morning, the man said. We're looking for a girl named Mara Benson. Went missing near Esperanza. He tipped his chin. Word is, she might have been seen with an Apache fella who keeps horses. Rafe met his stare without a flinch. You hear a lot of things in this country. Doesn't make 'em true. The man gave a thin smile. Maybe not. But Drex is paying good money to find her. She worth money to you? Rafe asked. She's worth staying alive for. His hand drifted toward the butt of his Colt, but Rafe didn't budge. It unsettled the man more than a raised weapon would have. We'll be back, the rider warned as he turned his horse. You can't hide her forever. When the dust settled, Mara stepped out. They know. Yeah, Rafe said, staring at the horizon where the riders vanished. But they don't know enough. She moved closer, her voice shaking. You can still send me away. Rafe. He reached for her again, and this time he didn't pull back. The wind had gone still. The valley felt like it was holding its breath. For the first time she saw past the scars, and Silence saw the man beneath them, steady, wounded, and entirely hers in that fragile heartbeat before danger rolled back in. Outside, storm clouds gathered again over the desert, dark, heavy, waiting. By the 3rd day, after the riders came, the wind turned strange, hot, restless, carrying dust that clung to the skin. Even the horses felt it snorting and shifting in their pens. Rafe sensed trouble before it reached the gate. He always did. He rose before dawn, cleaning his rifle, oiling the lever until it glided smooth. Mara watched from the doorway, hair mussed from sleep. You think they're coming back? She asked. He didn't look up. Men like that don't ride out this far for nothing. They'll be back. Drex isn't the sort to forget being crossed. Her throat tightened. What will you do? What I have to. He glanced toward her. You'll pack food, water, a blanket. If things go bad, you take Ghost and ride north until you hit the river. Follow it until you see cottonwoods. There's a ranch there, he added. Old couple Var and Olinia. Tell them I sent you. She shook her head hard. I won't run. Don't argue, Mara. I'm not leaving you to face them alone. He sighed, setting the rifle aside. You think courage means dying beside me. It means not running from what I owe. Their eyes locked, fear and fierce devotion tangled between them. Rafe wanted to tell her that what she owed was her own life, that saving herself was reason enough. The words caught in his chest. Instead, he said quietly, then at least learn how to survive it. By midday, a dust plume appeared on the horizon. They had spent the morning laying traps, simple things made of wire nails and planks scattered along the narrow trail leading toward the house. Rafe taught her where to crouch, how to keep the sun at her back when she took aim. You remember what I told you? He asked. Breathe with it, she whispered his lesson from weeks ago. He nodded once. Good. The wind carried the smell of horses and sweat. 3 riders, again, one of them, the scarred man. Behind them, rolled a wagon under a canvas cover. Mara's voice tightened. That's them. Rafe lifted his spyglass. And Drex is with them. She froze the name alone, twisting her stomach. He's here. Rafe lowered the glass. He wants to see you himself. Her hands clenched the railing. Then he'll get to. You don't have to prove anything, he said. I'm not proving, she replied. I'm remembering. The riders came slow confidence in every step of their horses. Wagon wheels creaked over dry ground, dust swirling around them. Rafe stood on the porch, rifle in hand, calm as if he were waiting for a mail delivery. Mara stayed near the doorway, her revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. Drex pulled his horse to a stop about 20 yards out. He was a heavy man, softened by years of indulgence, jaw crusted with gray stubble, his smile slick and poisonous. Well, now, he called, voice booming, ain't this a picture? The half-breed horseman and the white girl he stole. Rafe said nothing. Drex dismounted, spreading his hands wide. Easy now. We're just here for what's ours. Hand her over and maybe I forget this ever happened. Rafe's voice stayed low even. She's not yours. Everything on my land's mine, white, same as what I feed and keep. You feed filth, Rafe said. The men behind Drex shifted uneasily, glancing between them. Brig, the scarred one, muttered, we should just take her and be done. Drex waved him silent. Hush now, boy. Let the half-breed puff his chest. That was when Mara stepped forward, the light catching her hair. You want me? She said, voice steady. Come take me. Drex blinked, surprised she'd spoken. Well now. Look at you. Still got a little spark left. I miss that. He moved toward her slowly, like a man approaching a skittish horse. Her pistol came up clean and fast. The shot cracked across the valley, echoing off stone. Drex's hat flew a thin red line opening on his temple. He staggered wide-eyed. You little... Before he finished, Rafe fired. One of Drex's men dropped instantly, throat blooming red. The second turned to run, reaching for cover behind the wagon. His boot struck a buried board nails, punched through his leg. He screamed, collapsing into the dust. Brig fired once, grazing Rafe's shoulder. Mara spun, aimed low, and sent a bullet straight through his knee. He fell with a broken howl. Drex clawed his way behind the wagon, clutching his bleeding head. You think this changes anything? He shouted. You think the law'll side with you? Rafe reloaded, calmly. Law never did. Mara stepped beside him, now breathing steady, pistol level. Gunpowder and blood mixed in the air. The horses in the corral kicked and snorted, panic rippling across them like wind over tall grass. When they reached the wagon, Drex tried to raise his gun. Mara fired first, catching his shoulder and spinning him to the dirt. He gasped, spitting dust, half crawling, half begging. You should have died in that barn, he rasped. Mara looked down at him, pale but unflinching. I did, she said. The woman you chained there isn't alive anymore. He started to speak again, but the barrel of her pistol silenced him. She didn't fire, she let the weight of her words settle heavier than lead. Rafe lowered his rifle. "Let him crawl," he said. "He's already smaller than his own shadow." They left Drex in the dirt, his blood turning to dark mud under the sinking sun. By the time it dipped behind the ridge, the desert had reclaimed its stillness. Rafe leaned against the porch post, his shoulder bleeding through the torn sleeve. Mara cleaned the wound with whiskey in an old rag. Her hands were steady, though her eyes shone. "You could have killed him," Rafe said quietly. "I thought about it," she answered, "but it wouldn't give back anything he stole." He watched her firelight, softening her features. "You changed out there." "So did you," she said. "You stopped running." He almost smiled. "Maybe I just found something worth standing still for." When she finished bandaging him, she sat beside him on the porch. The desert stretched wide below them, stars burning cold and clear. He took her hand, rough fingers curling around hers. "Tomorrow we bury them," he said. "And after that—" He looked toward the horizon where dawn brushed the mountains. "After that, we start living." They sat in silence a while, the wind whispering through mesquite, the smoke and dust fading from the air. Behind them, the horses settled their tails, swishing in slow rhythm. Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. The storm had passed, but the world trembled with its echo. Rafe thought of the barn of Chain's blood and the hollow ache inside him. For the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. He turned his head just enough for his lips to brush her hair. "Rest," he murmured. "It's over now." She closed her eyes. "No, Rafe," she whispered. "It's beginning." Dawn crept over the valley, slow pale, as if the sun itself was exhausted by what it had witnessed. Smoke drifted low over the ranch, thin and blue, carrying the sharp scent of gunpowder and burned hay. The bodies were buried far from the house and soil, where little ever grew. Rafe marked each grave with a flat stone, not out of mercy, but because leaving the land unhonored felt wrong. Mara stood a few paces away, shawl wrapped tight against the chill. She didn't cry. The tears had burned out of her a long time ago. When Rafe joined her, she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon instead of the graves. "Do you think anyone will come looking for them?" she asked. He shook his head. "Men like that die quiet. No one claims them." She nodded, lips pressed thin. "Good." They walked back toward the house. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, yet something lighter too, maybe rain drifting somewhere far away. Inside the stove still held a faint orange glow. Mara poured coffee into chipped mugs, warming their hands. "You'll need to rest a few days," she said, glancing at the bandage on his shoulder. "I've rested enough for one lifetime." "You call this rest?" she teased softly. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Close enough." They sat at the table in easy silence, the kind that no longer felt heavy. When Mara finally spoke, her voice was quiet but certain. "I'm not leaving Rafe." He looked up from his cup. "Didn't ask you to. I mean it. I won't go back east, or to Dantan, or anywhere else. I'm done running." He studied her, searching for doubt. There wasn't any. "This land's hard," he said. "Lonely too. I've lived through worse than loneliness." That was true. He couldn't argue it. The next weeks brought an unfamiliar calm to the valley. Days stretched long and golden, humming with quiet work. Rafe rebuilt the barn door, repaired what the gunfire had torn apart. Mara planted sage and wildflowers near the porch, saying the earth deserved something living again. Sometimes she woke, gasping at night, chains shouting the barn still haunting her dreams. Rafe never asked. He simply lit the lamp and sat with her until her breathing slowed. Once she asked if he still dreamed of his prison, the fences, the soldiers. "Not the fences," he said, "just the silence after." "Does it ever stop?" He looked toward the dark window. "Maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe we just learn to live around it." One evening, they rode along the ridge together. The sun dropped behind the mountains, washing the desert in copper. Mara wore one of his old hats, far too big, and laughed when the wind tried to steal it. That sound, unguarded, alive, was something Rafe hadn't known he missed until it returned. At the top of the ridge, they dismounted and sat in the tall grass, watching dusk soften the world. "They won't stop," with Drex, Mara said. "Men like him don't die alone. There'll be others." Rafe nodded slowly. "There always are." "I don't want fear anymore," she whispered. "I want them to remember. I want them to know I lived." He turned toward her. "Then we live. That's how we make them remember." She studied his face, the truth in it, the quiet fire that never died. "You'd help me, if it came to that." "I started this," he said. "Wouldn't let you finish it alone." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the sage like a slow breath. Then Mara reached for his hand fingers, threading into his steadily. "I thought I'd never trust anyone again," she whispered. "But I trust you." He held her hand, rough palm warm against her skin. "Maybe that's what freedom is," he said. "Knowing who you can stand beside without fear." They rode home as the first stars appeared, sharp points of light in the cooling dark. The house waited below, a single lantern glowing in the window. Mara slid from her saddle, tired in a good way. Rafe unsaddled the horses, watching her step up to the porch. When he followed, she stood in the doorway, looking out across the valley. The air smelled of pine and smoke, but gentler now, as though the land itself was breathing easier. "It's quiet," she said. He came up beside her, close enough for their shoulders to touch. "Quiet's good." For a while she answered softly. Inside, firelight spread warm across the floor. Mara took his hand and pulled him in. For the first time, Rafe didn't hesitate. The long road behind them was scarred blood and dust and survival. But the one ahead felt different. It felt like a beginning. They ate a simple meal, beans bread, strong coffee. Afterward, Mara carried out a small box she'd found among his things, filled with scrap paper and a dull pencil stub. "You ever write your name?" she asked. Rafe frowned. "Can't say I ever had reason to." "Then tonight's as good a reason as any." She set the box before him, smiling gently. He hesitated, then picked up the pencil. His hand moved slow but sure, carving each letter into the rough wood of the table. When he finished, she traced the name with her fingertips. "Rafe White," she read softly. "Looks right, doesn't it?" He nodded, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "Feels right, too." Outside, the wind had quieted. Stars burned bright. Somewhere in the dark, a horse whinnied, soft and content. Mara slid her hand into his again, and this time he closed his fingers around hers without thinking. They stood together for a long while, the fire murmuring low, the world at peace. The road behind them had been made of fire, the road ahead of healing, but both led to the same place, home. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.